We've been starting out with looking at putting on the mind of Christ as we seek for the heart of Christ. And I don't know why particularly, but it just came to my mind this week that we live in a very conflicted time. And I guess all times are. But we're more cognizant of the one that is in front of our noses. But it seems like that conflict has become a very dominant place in our lives at all levels. And I'm having trouble with my earpiece for some reason. It wants to come loose. Maybe it'll settle out here in a minute. But as we deal with the conflicts of life, both on a personal level, political level, national level, and international level, it's very easy for us to get just perpetually angry and upset and in conflict. And we know, of course, that's Satan working in us. It's not what God plans for us. But the way that we get out of that and we get past that, as you know, is through forgiveness. We have to learn and practice forgiveness. I was just reminded of the statement of Paul in Ephesians 5, do not get drunk on wine, which leads to reckless indiscrimination, indiscretion. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. Speak to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Sing and make melody in your hearts to the Lord. Always give thanks to God, the Father, for everything in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. I think one of the avenues that we have available to us to help us to internalize and practice forgiveness is to remember to be thankful. We have so much to be thankful for in the midst of the things that aggravate us and irritate us and divide us, and in which we are in conflict. But if we can just step back and think for a minute to be thankful, and that thankfulness is a road toward putting on the mind of Christ. 1 Thessalonians 5:18, be thankful in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you who belong to Christ Jesus. That's hard to do, isn't it? It's hard to remember in the heat of conflict that there's more to be thankful for than there is not. And that our thankfulness can change our mind, can change the way that we're thinking. 1 Chronicles 16:8, give thanks to the Lord and proclaim his greatness. Let the whole world know what he has done. We have so much individually, collectively, as a congregation, as a country, to be thankful for. And we just need to keep that in mind. Today we are blessed to have our dear sister, Sister Fly, tell us what she believes about Jesus and what Jesus means to her. Come on, dear.
What Jesus means to me. When Lanny had asked me, or actually when I been here and was listening to others, I had been reflecting on if I was asked to do this, what would I say? And I said, well, what is my earliest memory of Jesus, of coming in contact with him? The earliest memory I have is my mother would have me and my brother. He was a year and 5 months younger than I was. But every night, without fail, we would have to get on our knees. She would recite the prayer, and we had to say it after her. And we did that. That was my earliest memory. I had to be about 4. That's the earliest that I can remember. So I know it had to be before then. So talking to God was something that I was taught early on. And I developed not only that, but we had to say our prayers before eating. And these are things that I have kept. And I had taught my children. When I got a little older, now my dad was military. We stayed on Shepherd Air Force Base. And they had chapel and Vacation Bible School. And I loved Vacation Bible School. It was not something that my mother had to prod. I wanted to go. And I loved going to chapel. Because at the time, my mother, who had been raised Methodist, she wasn't going. We weren't going to church. But there was a friend who told about the Church of Christ. And let me back up just a little bit. My mother would watch Oral Roberts on TV, and I know it goes really far back. I watched Oral Roberts on TV, and I can remember when he say, just put your hand on the TV. Well, I did that because, I wanted to be a Christian. I went to chapel, and I went to Vacation Bible School. But when my mother and my sister, they started going to Church of Christ, Welch Street Church of Christ in San Antonio, Texas, and Wichita Falls, sorry. And so that was our start of going to church. When we moved from there and moved to San Antonio, until my mother found a church, I remember going to a Baptist church. We went there, and then we found a Church of Christ, Briggsdale, and then that's where I started going. Now, David had mentioned, and I remember, I don't know if it was a written rule or whatever, but we had to be 12 before we were baptized. So I had to wait till I was 12, but I wanted, and as soon as I turned 12, I was baptized. So I have been a member of the church for, way before then. So God has always been in my life and my guiding force. Now, I have not always lived like I should, but I've always felt guilt for anything that I did that was not right. I had a strong, and that's something that I know. And so I have lived my life with God being first. Even though, like I said, it had not been a perfect life. But I know that he has always been there, because I have felt his presence and him guiding me. And there have been things in my life and people brought into my life that I can look back on, that I know that it was God working, or the Spirit that was working. The circumstances, and I know some of you don't remember my husband, some of you do. even the circumstances by which I met him was unique, and I still remember it to this day. He was not a Christian when I met him, but I had known his name before I ever met him because it was a mutual friend. And she spoke highly of him, but he wasn't a Christian. He was just a good person. And the day that I made a choice to go, I had two choices, and I made the right one. But I can still remember why, no, I'm not gonna go, no. But I did, and that's when I met him. And I had no interest in him, but he was a good person, and so it just worked out. And he helped me in my spiritual walk, because I had, as Church of Christ, we have, you're raised legalism, so it had to be this way or this, but he had a clean slate. So he was the one that said, wait, well, where does it say you have to do this? Why? So he had to help me. And so, yes, God has always been there, and he still works. He sustains me and he keeps me. And I thank him every day for what he has done for me and how he's working in my life. He is real. He's always there through whatever circumstance you might find yourself. He's there. You just trust him. Because I know, because there's other things that have happened in my life, but it was by the grace of God that I stand here today. I know him. Trust him. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherlyn. If you didn't have the opportunity to know Purvis, her husband, you missed a great opportunity. What a spectacular Christian man. So inspirational. All right, to our text. John chapter 1, we're already up to verse 14, and we're only in the 11th class. We're doing great. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the Father's one and only Son. John testified about him when he shouted to the crowds, "This is the one I was talking about when I said, 'Someone is coming after me who is far greater than I am, for he existed long before me.'" I mentioned at the end of class last week that we're going to share the song that we sing here quite a bit, and this is a recording that Dee and I did along with 120 of our friends, called "We Have Seen His Glory," and it has a reading of our text in it. But as I was thinking about this week, got to thinking about the word glory. We have seen his glory. What in the world does glory even mean? Have you ever thought about that? What do we mean when we talk about glory? Well, I had to do a little bit of digging, of course, being who I am. The Greek word for glory in the New Testament is doxa, and the Hebrew word in the Hebrew scriptures is kabo. And even though both of those words translate into English as glory, they have a little bit of a different meaning. And together they kind of add a little more dimension to the definition and understanding of the word glory. Kabo actually comes from a root word that means to be heavy, to have value, to have merit. In doxa, you're familiar with doxology, of course, but doxa is that which evokes a good opinion, a good thought about something or someone. Both of them convey the idea of something that has inherent, intrinsic worth, value. So when we talk about the glory of God, we're talking about something that is weighty with good intrinsic value. Some synonyms for glory are splendor, brightness, Shekinah. You've heard us talk about the Shekinah glory of God, which is the presence of God. Magnificence, excellence, preeminence, dignity, majesty, in the sense of being absolute perfection. So this is a little bit better comprehension, hopefully, and fleshing out of the word glory when we say we have seen his glory. You're welcome to sing along, by the way.
We have seen his glory. We have seen his glory. We have seen his glory. The one and only Son.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made.
We have seen his glory. We have seen his glory. We have seen his glory. The one and only Son.
The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth.
We have seen his glory. We have seen his glory. We have seen his glory. The one and only Son. We have seen his glory. We have seen his glory. We have seen his glory. The one and only Son. We have seen his glory.
Yes, indeed we have. From his abundance, we have all received one gracious blessing after another. For the law was given through Moses, but God's unfailing love and faithfulness came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but the unique one, or the one and only Son, who is himself God, is near to the Father's heart. He has revealed God to us. And when Philip asked Jesus, show us the Father and it'll be enough. And Jesus replied, what? You've seen me, you've seen him. Jesus reveals his own glory, and he reveals the glory of the Father. I underline the word faithfulness here. There's in much of the religious, Christian religious world, there's the idea presented that we are saved by faith. And some people say we're saved by faith only. I can agree with that if we understand faith in the sense in which John refers to it here. God's unfailing love and faithfulness. It's not believing that Jesus is, but it's acting upon that belief. That's what faithfulness is. It's doing the things that Jesus has asked us to do in the way that he's asked us to do them for the purpose that he has asked us to do them. That faith is certainly a saving faith. And everything is rolled up into that concept. Through this man, we all receive gifts of grace beyond our imagination. If you have trouble being thankful in the minute of conflict and discouragement and pain and sorrow and loss, remember this. We have received gifts of grace beyond our imagination. You see, Moses gave us rules to live by, but Jesus, the Anointed, offered us gifts of grace and truth. God, unseen until now, is revealed in the Logos, the Word, the voice, God's only Son, straight from the Father's heart. What a high view of Jesus is presented to us by his special friend, John. Just beautiful. Well, we're switching now into Luke, pick up the beginning of his gospel, his story of Jesus. He says, many people have set out to write accounts about the events that have been fulfilled among us. They used the eyewitness reports circulating among us from the early disciples. Having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I also have decided to write an accurate account for you, most honorable Theophilus, so that you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. So this is the way that Luke begins his accounting of the good news of Jesus. We're giving a little bit of background about each of the four Gospels as we encounter them in this chronological look at the text of the four books of good news. So we'll look just a little bit at the biography of Luke. He was a physician, as you know. The name Luke, Greek Lukos, is apparently an abbreviation for the Greek Lucanos. The only way we know his name is because Paul tells us his name. He tells us in Colossians 4, 2 Timothy 4, and Philemon 1, he makes reference to him by name. Luke doesn't name himself in any of his writings, either the Gospel according to Luke or in the book of Acts, which he also wrote. It's kind of interesting. If Paul didn't write Hebrews, which I personally don't think he did, some of you may disagree with me, and it's all right, you're welcome to be wrong. But if Paul didn't write Hebrews, then Luke is the most prolific writer of the New Testament. The book of Luke and the book of the Acts of the Apostles together comprise a larger volume of work than any other writer has represented in the New Testament. The clear implication of Luke 1 and 2 is that Luke himself was not an eyewitness to the ministry of Jesus. However, he probably had access to all of them, including Mary. I don't know that he ever, I don't know why he would have had any opportunity or occasion to actually have met Jesus himself. But he clearly has done a yeoman's work in interviewing and researching and developing a historical account of all of the life of Jesus that was available for him to know. He comes nearer to doing what we might think of as a biography of Jesus than any of the other gospel writers. He approaches it as a historian developing a biographical account. Paul refers to him as a physician, and if anybody needed to have a physician in his continual company, it was the Apostle Paul. He had a bad habit of getting stoned and whipped and otherwise beat up and cast in prison, which was not a real healthy thing in his day. And so it was very good that he had in his company and in his close companionship somebody who knew something about how to treat the physical body. In Colossians 4 and 14, Luke is identified by Paul as separate from those of the circumcision, those who are Jewish. He lists a group of Jewish Christians and a group of non-Jewish Christians, and Luke is in that group of non-Jewish Christians. And that makes him, as far as I know, again, not knowing who wrote Hebrews, but that makes him the only non-Jewish writer of the New Testament. Well, we know that the book of Hebrews was not written by a non-Hebrew. I say we know that. It's such a Hebrew book, it would have to have been a Jew. He was believed by the early Christian writers to have come directly from paganism to Christianity as opposed to having first been a Jewish proselyte. We don't know that. That's a matter of tradition, a matter of some of the writings of the early church fathers. But some of the Gentiles who were converted to Christianity may have been first converted to Judaism, but it's not believed that Luke was one of those. He was an educated man. His Greek is matched only by the writings of Paul and whoever wrote the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews is a very high quality of Greek as far as literature is concerned, as are Paul's writings. And the writings of Luke in the Gospel of Luke and Acts are of that quality. We don't know exactly where his birthplace is, but it may have been at Philippi in northern Macedonia in Greece. I've been to Philippi, visited a time or two, and I didn't meet him there, but that doesn't mean he didn't come from there. Luke is a storyteller. He paints pictures with words. Some believe that he was perhaps an artist as well. That's just tradition. We don't know about that. Dr. Luke was surely a great man, especially called of God. He was a scientist, a physician. He was a historian, brilliant writer, inspired writer, we believe, inspired by the Holy Spirit, Christian apologist, and he was a biblical creationist. He believed in the Genesis account of creation. And we can be very thankful to God that we have his written testimony. It adds a great deal of information that would be sorely missed if we didn't have it. Speaking of doctors and ancient doctors, I just wanted to throw in just coincidentally a real quick look, just because it's interesting to me, about another doctor who actually predated Dr. Luke by about 400 years. You've heard reference to Hippocrates, right? Not an unfamiliar name to you. He lived from 460 to 370 BC. He was an amazing gentleman, amazing physician. And the things that he left in his wake are just amazing, even today. He was the first to categorize illness as being acute or chronic or endemic. He recognized epidemic. He coined the terms such as exacerbate, relapse, crisis, and convalescence. These are all words that he generated and created and brought into the vernacular, into the vocabulary, and we continue to use them today. And this is, again, 400 years before Luke. Teachings remain relevant to present-day students of pulmonary medicine and surgery. But the main reason I brought it up this morning is because of one other thing that he left for the medical profession. You've heard of the Hippocratic oath, right? The doctors, the oath that at some point, some doctors, I don't know that they do it today, but in times of the recent past, they would take the Hippocratic oath, and not Hippocratic, that's different, okay? Some of them may take Hippocratic oaths, I don't know. But the Hippocratic oath has morphed and changed over time. But I wanted to share with you just briefly the way that Hippocrates wrote it and adhered to it. He was, of course, a Greek, and he worshiped the Greek gods. He said, I swear by Apollo the healer, Asclepius, who was the god of healing, Hygeia, remember that the word hygienic comes from that. Panacea, we have the word panacea today. And I take to witness all the gods, all the goddesses, to keep according to my ability and my judgment the following oath and agreement: to consider dear to me as my parents him who taught me this art. The guy who was my teacher in learning medicine, I hold him dear as a parent. To live in common with him, and if necessary, to share my goods with him. Not only am I going to honor him, I'm going to take care of him if he needs help, because he has been my mentor and my teacher. I will prescribe regimens of the good, for the good of my patients, according to my ability and my judgment, and never do harm to anyone. That's one of the phrases you still hear in the medical profession: do no harm. And we hope that they adhere to that. I will give no deadly medicine to anyone if asked, nor suggest any such counsel. And similarly, I will not give a woman a pessary to cause an abortion. He would not participate in euthanasia. This is 400 years before Christ. Also, he would not prescribe something that would be intended to cause an abortion. I think I looked up pessary, and they're still used today, but I think they're primarily used as a surgical implement to hold the internal organs. But they also apparently had the ability to cause an abortion. We're used to that in times past. But I will preserve the purity of my life and my arts. I will not cut for stone, even for patients in whom the disease is manifest. It seems that there were some people who, if you came to them with gallstones, they were hungry for money, and so they would just go ahead and do the surgery whether they were qualified or not. And Hippocrates is saying, I'm not going to do things that I'm not qualified to do. It's a weird way to say it for us today, but it meant something to them then. In every house where I come, I will enter only for the good of my patients, keeping myself far from all intentional ill-doing and all seduction, and especially from the pleasures of love with women or with men, be they free or slaves. A moral code for him back in that time. All that may come to my knowledge in the exercise of my profession or in daily commerce with men, which ought not to be spread abroad, I will keep secret and will never reveal. We now have that encoded in law in this country, patient confidentiality. But it's just interesting that he pioneered all of this so long ago. Luke begins his account to a man named Theophilus. And Theophilus is from the Greek word Theophilos, and means a friend of God or loved by God. The most common theory is that Theophilus was a high social standing friend of Luke's, and probably a benefactor of Luke's. It would have been common in that time for people who practiced the art of medicine to have somebody who was well-to-do and well-placed who would be their source of income, their source of a livelihood. In his gospel, Luke addressed Theophilus as most excellent, and that is actually a rather formal Roman title that designates not only respect, but probably indicates somebody of official importance, somebody who had a place of standing in the Greek society there in that time. And the record in the Gospel of Luke has a particular characteristic. This characteristic is that Luke always shows us the man Savior, the mingling of the divine attributes with the human virtues to produce the highest standard of morality for the New Testament Jubilee, the New Testament time of celebration. Each of the four Gospels has its own very unique flavor. Each is written for a specific audience from a specific perspective. And Luke's really has an emphasis on showing Jesus in this very unique perspective of being fully God and fully human. And that was a tall mountain to climb. And for many, it still is, to come to grips with that idea. Don't you love that picture? Jesus sitting there with the Apple computer open. I think that's a pretty good way of illustrating the humanness and the divineness of Jesus. Well, as usual, we're going to take a look at the Gospel of according to Luke with our friends at the Bible Project, and we'll have the first part of it, but we're not going to have time to do it today because we're 3 minutes short of enough time to finish that, and I don't want to break it off in the middle of it. So, Lord willing, we'll have that as part of our introduction next week. When we finish with looking at that next week, then we will jump into the Gospel of Matthew and get his opening into this greatest story ever told. And he begins with a record of the ancestors, the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, a descendant of David and of Abraham. Now, Luke's going to have a genealogy also, but his will come, I think, in the second chapter, if I remember. But Matthew just jumps right in on that very, very early on. Jesus, son of David, son of Abraham. And of course, Matthew's perspective is going to be very much directed at a Jewish audience, confirming Jesus as the long-awaited and prayed-for Messiah, established by his linkage to that Hebrew scripture, the fulfillment of prophecy, and be very much associated with that. The name Matthew is a Hebrew name, and I can't pronounce it, but it means gift of Yahweh. I think his given name, the name his parents gave him, was Levi. He's referred to as Levi, but he's also referred to as Matthew, and some have theorized that perhaps Matthew is a name that Jesus gave him after he called him to be a disciple. As you know, Jesus did that for some others, Peter notably, kind of gave them a new name as they came into his discipleship. Matthew is spoken of 5 times in the New Testament. Matthew 9:9, when he was called by Jesus to follow him, and then 4 times in the list of the apostles. They're listed in Luke 6, Mark 3, and Matthew 10, and Acts 1. I'm really being interested in and enjoying the way that the Chosen has chosen to depict Matthew. We'll share that with you some later on down the road, but I don't know if it's accurate or not, but it sure is interesting. We know, of course, that he was despised by the fellow Jews, and I'm sure pretty much despised by the Romans, because nobody liked tax collectors, even though the Romans required them, and the Jews were required to pay to them. But it takes a special kind of person to be in that position. And I'm sure Matthew was that kind of special person. Well, we're going to leave off here, and we'll pick up with a look at the overview of the first half of the book of Luke next week, and then we will jump right on into Matthew and look at the genealogies as they're presented both by Matthew and by Luke. We will not be reading the genealogies unless one of you wants to volunteer to do that. I will not subject you to me trying to read the names. Dan, would you like to do that? You want to do that for us next week? No? Okay. We may just pass on that part of it. We will look at the genealogies because they're very interesting, number one, and they're very informative, number two. So thank you so much for being here and putting up with all of this. And thank you for all of you who are online, and have a wonderful God bless week.